My name is Haley Sterling. When I was 7 years old, Julian Sterling brought me home from the orphanage. He saved me. He gave me a home. But when I fell hopelessly in love with him and kissed him, he coldly turned his head away. Haley, you disgust me. After waking up from a car crash, I lost my memories. Everyone let out a sigh of relief. But in the dead of night, Julian broke into my room. He bit my earlobe and whispered, "Haley, you're just sick. That's why you forgot about us." I pushed him away. "Julian, I'm cured. Even my sickness of loving you is gone." It hurt. My head throbbed so badly. Just before I opened my eyes and fully regained consciousness, I heard a polite, gentle voice. "Mr. Sterling, your daughter has minor head trauma. We can't rule out the possibility of amnesia." I froze. Amnesia? Images flashed through my mind. My parents' disappointed eyes, a man's cold indifference, and in the mirror, my own twisted, frantic face, filled with resentment and hatred. Then let it be amnesia. Forget everything, just like everyone wanted. I opened my eyes. A second later, several anxious figures rushed to my bedside. My mom held my hand, her eyes rimmed with red, her face full of worry. "Haley, how are you feeling? Does anything hurt?" I stared at her, my eyes blank and confused. "Who are you?" Shock flashed across her face. She frowned, panicked. "Haley, it's me. I'm your mother." I repeated the word softly. "Mother." Then I shook my head, looking at her helplessly. "Mom, my head hurts so much. I've forgotten so many things. I can't remember anything." I leaned my cheek against her hand, rubbing against it like a stray kitten. "It's okay, sweetheart. If you can't remember, don't force it. Mom is right here," she soothed. I nodded obediently, then turned my gaze to scan the other people in the room. Looking at the man standing beside her, his powerful aura intact but his face softened with pity, I whispered, "Dad?" He wasn't used to showing affection, but he still gave me a gentle nod. Suppressing the sting in my nose, I looked at the last man. His face was an icy mask, his brow slightly furrowed. His dark eyes were like a black hole, ready to swallow any emotion. "And you are?" The hospital room fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone's expressions shifted, thick with tension. It's Julian, Haley." My mom spoke up, breaking the suffocating silence. I let out a relaxed smile and called out obediently, "Julian." My parents looked shocked. Tears of relief actually welled in my mother's eyes. For some reason, I thought I saw a flash of emptiness on his cold face. My eyes, however, were completely calm. A peaceful surrender. "Julian, in this life, I will be exactly what you want. I will be your sister. A sister who will never, ever cross the line." My mom whispered a few more soothing words, but her eyes kept darting toward the door. Finally, she spoke softly. "Haley, Saraphina is outside. Do you want to see her?" I froze. My head started throbbing again, like someone was slicing it with a dull knife. In my mind, the screeching of tires and the violent crash echoed. All I could see was a blinding flash of red. But I still forced a sweet, obedient smile. "If you want me to see her, Mom, I will." A relieved smile appeared on my mom's face. Saraphina Vance walked in. She stopped at the foot of my bed, clutching her designer bag tightly, her face stained with tears. She started crying the moment she opened her mouth. "Haley, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to hit you with my car, I swear. Please don't hate me, and please don't come between Julian and me. I love him so much. I'll get down on my knees and beg you if I have to." My heart felt ice cold, but my face remained blank and innocent. She made a show of lowering herself to the ground, but her eyes kept darting to me. Her half-bent knees froze, making her look incredibly foolish. Eventually, Julian grabbed her hand and pulled her back up. Saraphina leaned into his chest, sobbing softly. His arm wrapped around her waist, but his sharp, piercing eyes were locked onto me. You can't entirely blame Saraphina for this. Haley ran out of nowhere. Saraphina didn't have time to break. Was that really what happened? When I ran into the street, your car was moving slowly. We were at least 20 feet apart. Through the windshield, I saw Saraphina's face clearly. She was smiling. A cruel, triumphant smile. "And what about you, Julian, sitting in the passenger seat? You looked at me with nothing but coldness and disgust. What were you thinking back then? Were you thinking that I would get out of the way out of fear? Or did you want this disgusting sister, the one who dared to love you and tried to stop your engagement, to just die?" If Julian hadn't grabbed the steering wheel at the last second and slammed on the brakes, I really would have died under those tires. I averted my eyes first, looking at the weeping, delicate Saraphina in his arms. "Saraphina, even though I've forgotten some things, Julian is right. I must have been at fault too. Why would I want to break you two up? We're going to be family soon anyway." Saraphina was so shocked she stopped crying. Pure joy flashed in her eyes. Julian still stood like a statue by my bed. He was tall, his expression dark. When those cold eyes looked down at me, it was like he was looking at something worthless. And he was right. My life was cheap. It was only because of the scraps of charity Julian had thrown my way that I became the heiress of the Sterling family. How could someone as lowly as me ever dare to crave someone so far out of reach? Before I became the pampered Haley Sterling, I was just an orphan girl in a rundown shelter in this city. On the day the Sterling family came to adopt, the director gathered all the girls in the courtyard, lined up like products for inspection. I was small and malnourished. I was easily pushed into the very back by the bigger, healthier kids. Every child there knew that being chosen meant escaping hunger and cold. It meant a ticket to heaven. Gradually, I found it hard to breathe. Survival instinct kicked in, and I started waving my arms frantically, trying to be seen. After what felt like forever, the suffocating crowd suddenly parted. I opened my eyes, and Julian was standing right in front of me. I remember that day clearly. The old oak tree in the courtyard had just sprouted its first green leaves of spring. A gentle breeze swept across my face, carrying the scent of damp earth and fresh grass. The young boy looked down at me, placing a pale, slender hand on my head. Her. I'll take her. Those simple words, like a divine decree, changed my life forever. I went from an ugly duckling stuck in the mud to the high society daughter of the Sterling family. Only later did I find out why Julian chose me. The Sterling's biological daughter, Angelica, had drowned. Before she went under, she had waved her arms helplessly, just like I did. My adoptive parents were always busy, and Julian didn't really have any feelings for me. I was basically raised by the nannies. But while the nannies could provide gourmet meals and a warm, luxurious bed, they couldn't stop the bullying at school. Back then, my classmates called me a charity case, a parasite, and a thief who stole someone else's life. I kept my head down and let them drag me through the dirt. I knew protesting was useless. No one would stand up for me. Until the day Julian was sent by our mother to attend my parent-teacher conference. He saw them throwing trash and broken pencils at my head. He heard the vulgar insults they hurled at me. Only then was I rescued from that never-ending nightmare. The kids who bullied me were forced to kneel in a row, apologizing to me. They cried, slapping their own faces. But I knew they weren't kneeling to me. They were kneeling to the terrifying, cold-faced teenager standing beside me. Julian had saved my life once again. When did I start developing those forbidden feelings? Was it when he shielded me from the bullies, holding my shoulders? Was it when his hand covered mine, teaching me my first piano piece? Or was it during my first extravagant birthday party, when he looked at me with such tenderness amid the crowded room? I wasn't greedy or shameless. I never intended to expose this dirty, secret crush. If only that accidental, intoxicating kiss had never happened. That day, I thought I saw a glimmer of hope. Like a drowning person, I reached out, thinking he would save me again. But instead, I got his freezing words. Haley, you're sick. You disgust me. Julian, you saved me, only to drag me down to hell with your own hands. You made me, and you destroyed me. Except for my fake amnesia, my physical injuries weren't severe. At my request, my mom handled the discharge papers and took me home. Up until the day I left the hospital, I never saw Julian again. It was an unspoken agreement. No one mentioned him in front of me. My forgetting him was a blessing the entire Sterling family was incredibly grateful for. After all, the elite Sterling family couldn't afford a scandal about a twisted girl who fell in love with her own brother. On the day I got home, my mom and the chef prepared a massive feast. Julian showed up too. At the dinner table, Julian was a carbon copy of our stern, silent father. He kept his head down, acting mature and composed, not saying a single unnecessary word. Only my mom kept talking, trying to make me feel comfortable. But every time my eyes accidentally drifted toward Julian, she would tense up. I suppose the trauma of her adopted daughter, falling in love with her biological son, had left a deep scar. I felt a pang of guilt, which only solidified my decision. Mom, Dad, I want to go to grad school in London. The moment those words left my mouth, all clinking of silverware stopped. In my peripheral vision, I felt Julian's pitch-black eyes locking onto me. My body stiffened, but I didn't look at him. My mom put down her fork, looking puzzled. Why the sudden decision to study abroad? I just want to further my education. Honestly, when I graduated high school, my parents wanted to send me abroad. But back then, I only wanted to stay by Julian's side. Well, if that's what you want, Before my mom could finish, a deep voice cut her off. No. Everyone looked at Julian. His face was expressionless, but his throat bobbed with difficulty. Mom, Haley just got out of the hospital. She hasn't fully recovered, and her memory is still hazy. Are you really comfortable sending her across the world right now? My mom nodded, turning to persuade me. I offered a reassuring smile. I'm not leaving tomorrow. It's only July. I wouldn't leave until September at the earliest. Mom, please let me go. My mom had always spoiled me, but that affection was never pure. Every time she looked at me, I felt like she was looking at someone else through me, probably her poor, deceased child. She hesitated, glancing at Julian, but eventually she sighed. All right, sweetheart. She told me to pick a university soon so she could make the arrangements. Are you really that desperate to leave? Julian spoke, his eyes dark and unreadable. Julian, you wanted to get rid of me so badly. Now that I'm leaving, shouldn't you be thrilled? I smiled. Don't worry, Julian. I'll make sure to fly back for your wedding. He froze. His grip on his fork tightened until his knuckles turned white. A flash of pure fury crossed his eyes before vanishing. Do whatever you want. Haley, did you really lose your memory? In my bedroom, my best friend, Chloe Montgomery, was circling me, inspecting my head with deep concern. I blinked innocently. Really? She looked skeptical, tapping my forehead. Then do you remember me? I smiled. Of course. You're Chloe. She looked even more confused. Then what did you forget? My smile faded. Just some meaningless things. Things that only brought me pain. She went quiet, understanding the unspoken implication. After a long pause, she asked cautiously, so are you going to Julian's birthday party the day after tomorrow? Julian's birthday. In the past, I cared about his birthday more than he did. I would make his gifts by hand, never repeating a concept. I would design every detail of his party. He never cared, but I minded every little thing. I always felt Julian's birthday held a sacred meaning for me. Because of him, my life had been saved. But this year, I had almost forgotten it. I guess no pain is too deep to be erased after a clean slate. Humans are wired to avoid pain after all. What are you planning to get him this year? I thought about it. I'll just buy a watch from your family's brand. Chloe stunned, clearly not expecting this. For his birthday last year, I had literally flown to France to learn his favorite French recipes, and I even hand-designed a custom watch strap, hiring a master craftsman to make it. The contrast in effort was staggering. What? Don't want my money? I teased. Chloe snapped out of it and laughed. Are you kidding? I'd love nothing more than for a sterling heiress to boost my family's sales. Julian, I hope you like this year's gift. The birthday party was just a glorified networking event for the city's elite youth. Julian was surrounded by a crowd, wearing his trademark polite but distant smile. He held his champagne glass high, looking like an undefeated general. He was always so powerful, so invincible. He navigated the room with effortless grace. The flashing lights were giving me a headache, so I put down my glass and slipped away toward the second-floor balcony for some fresh air. Saraphina, I heard Julian's adopted sister is a real piece of work. You won't let her bully you once you marry into the family, right? Behind the heavy green velvet curtains, I froze. I heard about her too. Apparently, she's obsessed with Julian. Is that true? He's literally her brother. That's so disgusting. She's adopted though. They aren't blood-related. Still gross. Crushing on her own brother? She's a freak. Then came a malicious laugh. She's just a street rat playing dress-up. She actually thinks she's a real Sterling. Imagine trying to seduce Julian. She should look in the mirror and see if she's even worthy. It was Seraphina's mocking voice. She'll keep it down. If someone hears us, no matter what, she's still a Sterling. We can't afford to mess with them. What heiress? The Sterlings don't care about her. I literally hit her with my car, and they didn't do anything to me. Julian even defended me. That proves she has zero status in that house. Even through the thick curtains, I could picture the smug sneer on Seraphina's face. After a brief silence, a timid voice asked, Wait, you mean you hit Haley on purpose? I only regret not hitting her harder. A freak like her who lusts after her own brother. Before she could finish, I ripped the curtains open. I grabbed Seraphina by her hair and slammed her face straight into the brick wall. Thud. Her forehead split open, and blood began to trickle down her face. The balcony erupted into high-pitched screams. Someone tried to drag me off her, but I violently shook them off. I leaned down, whispering right into Seraphina's ear. Not hard enough, you say? Want to see if I have the guts to throw you off this balcony? The stone balcony of the Sterling estate was silent, save for the rhythmic, wet, dripping of blood hitting the cold balustrade. Seraphina Vance lay slumped against the brickwork, her manicured fingers clawing at the mortar, her chest heaving as she let out a series of high-pitched, hysterical whimpers. The sharp, metallic scent of blood immediately cut through the heavy fragrance of the night-blooming jasmine on the terrace. The small crowd of her high society friends stood frozen, their champagne glasses trembling in their hands, their faces pale under the warm yellow lights of the lanterns. Haley, a sharp, authoritative voice broke the silence of the balcony. Julian stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the bright light of the ballroom. His dark gray suit was immaculate, but his brow was slightly furrowed, his dark eyes locking onto me with a look of profound, cold intensity. Behind him, my parents and several security guards stepped onto the terrace. Seraphina, her friends screamed, finally finding their voices as they rushed to her side, wrapping their silk shawls around her bleeding forehead. Haley tried to kill her. She dragged her by her hair and slammed her head into the wall. We all saw it. My mom let out a horrified gasp, her hand immediately flying to cover her mouth. Haley, oh sweetie, what did you do? I didn't answer. I stood in the middle of the balcony, my fingers slightly red. From the rough collar of Saraphina's dress, my expression completely blank and calm. I didn't try to hide my hands. I didn't try to make an excuse. Julian, save me. Saraphina sobbed, reaching out a bloody hand toward him, her delicate, pale face looking grotesque under the smeared red stains. She's crazy. She said she was going to throw me off the balcony. She's still obsessed with you. She's trying to destroy our family. Julian didn't look at her. His gaze remained fixed on me. His chest gave a slow, heavy heave, his jaw tightening until the muscles in his neck were rigid. He took a slow step forward, his polished shoes crunching on a piece of shattered glass from a broken glass. Why? Julian asked, his voice low, dry, and entirely quiet. I looked at him, then at the weeping Saraphina, and finally at my parents, who were looking at me with a mixture of terror and deep, clawing disappointment. She said she hit me on purpose. I said, my voice remarkably level, carrying a gentle, almost clinical indifference. I was just verifying if her brakes worked. And it turns out her skull is much softer than my bumper. Haley, my dad roared, his face turning a dark, dangerous crimson. That's enough. Apologize to Saraphina right now, or so help me. No, Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through my dad's anger like a knife. Everyone froze. Julian walked over to Saraphina, his expression flat. He didn't lift her into his arms. He didn't smooth her hair. He simply reached down and handed his silk handkerchief to her friends. Take her to the family doctor downstairs. Have the wound treated. Julian, Saraphina cried, her eyes wide with shock. She tried to murder me. Aren't you going to do anything to her? I'll handle it, Julian said, his voice dropping into a cold final register. Go. Her friends quickly helped her up, her lavender silk dress stained with gray brick dust and red blood as they hurried her out of the balcony, her high-pitched whimpers slowly fading into the quiet corridors of the mansion. My parents looked at me, then at Julian, and finally my mom let out a long, ragged sigh of pure, exhausting worry. Julian, the guests. The media is downstairs. We can't let this get out. I'll handle it, Mom, Julian repeated, not turning around. Go back to the ballroom. Tell them Saraphina slipped on the terrace. My dad hesitated, his hand clenching into a tight fist at his side, but eventually he pulled my mom back into the warm light of the ballroom, the heavy, green velvet curtains falling shut behind them, leaving only Julian and me on the dark, quiet balcony. The rain was beginning to fall again, a soft, gray mist that cooled the hot stone of the balustrade. I turned my back on him, looking out at the glittering lights of the city below, my hands resting on the damp railing. Are you done making a scene? Julian's voice came from behind me, low and dangerous. I smiled, a quiet, dry laugh escaping my lips. I didn't make a scene, Julian, I murmured, not looking back. I was just cleaning up the trash. You should thank me. After all, your future wife has a very loud mouth. I heard his footsteps behind me, slow and heavy, until I could feel the warm, suffocating pressure of his presence right against my back. Haley, he whispered, his breath warm against my neck. But I didn't move. I stood in the cold rain, my heart as still as the stone. Below us, the bedroom was silent, the dark blue curtains blocking the pale moonlight of the city. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of the rain against the window pane, a steady, rhythmic drumming that filled the quiet room. My head still throbbed slightly from the car accident, but my mind was completely clear. The door to my bedroom suddenly clicked. In the quiet, the sound was as loud as a gunshot. I didn't move. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes fixed on the shadows near the door. A tall figure stepped into the room. He carried the faint, bitter smell of whiskey and damp tobacco, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet as he walked toward my bed. It was Julian. He was no longer wearing his formal jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly disheveled. His eyes, usually so cold and controlled, were wild, bloodshot, and filled with a dark, suffocating desperation. He knelt beside my bed, his large hands reaching out to grab my shoulders, his fingers digging into my skin through my thin cotton nightgown. Julian, I whispered, my voice calm, devoid of the panic he probably expected. What are you doing in here? It's past midnight. He didn't answer. He leaned down, his face burying into the crook of my neck, his breathing ragged and hot against my skin. Suddenly his teeth clamped down on my earlobe, a sharp, biting pressure that made me gasp. Haley, he whispered, his voice a dry, ragged rattle. You're just sick. That's why you forgot about us. I looked at him, my dark eyes completely calm under the dim light of the street lamp outside. I reached up, my hand resting against his chest, and slowly, firmly I pushed him back. Julian, I said, my voice carrying a quiet, absolute indifference. I'm cured. Even my sickness of loving you is gone. Julian froze. His fingers slowly loosened from my shoulders, his body turning rigid as he stared down at me. The desperate, wild look in his eyes slowly cracked, revealing a deep, hollow emptiness that I had never seen on his face before. Cured? He whispered, his voice shaking. Yes, I said, sitting up in the bed and pulling the blanket over my shoulders. I don't hate you anymore, Julian. I don't hate Saraphina. I don't care about your engagement, or your birthday, or the Sterling family's assets. I looked at his pale, handsome face. You wanted to cure me, didn't you? When you told me I disgusted you, when you defended Saraphina after she hit me, you were trying to make me understand my place. You wanted to make sure I would never, ever cross the line. I smiled, a soft, genuine smile that carried no malice, only a peaceful surrender. You won, Julian. I've gone back to my place. I'm your sister now. Just a quiet, obedient orphan who was lucky enough to be brought into your house. Julian stared at me, his chest giving a sudden, violent heave. He reached out to touch my hand, but I calmly pulled my hand back, tucking it under the blanket. Get out of my room, Julian, I said softly. The servants will be up in a few hours. We wouldn't want another scandal in the Sterling family. He stood up slowly, his body shaking with a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. He looked at me, then at the closed blue curtains, and finally he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy and uneven on the dark carpet. The door closed with a soft, final click. I lay back down on my pillows, my breathing calm, my heart steady. Julian, you wanted a sister who would never cross the line. Now you have her. I hope you like the silence. The next morning, the Sterling mansion was filled with a tense, heavy silence. My mom sat at the breakfast table, her eyes red-rimmed, her hand trembling as she held her coffee cup. My dad was staring at his iPad, his face grim, his lips pressed into a thin, tight line. Julian was not at the table. He had left for the company at 6 a.m. Haley, my mom said, her voice quiet. The Vance family, they've just called. Saraphina's forehead required 6 stitches, and her father is demanding a formal meeting today. He's talking about canceling the engagement. I set my teacup down slowly, the porcelain clicking softly against the saucer. Then let him cancel it, Mom, I said, my voice calm and polite. My dad looked up, his brow furrowing in irritation. Haley, do you have any idea what that engagement means for the Sterling group? The Vance family controls 70% of our southern shipping lanes. If they pull their support, our stock price will crash. They won't pull their support, Dad, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a small, silver flash drive. I slid it across the white tablecloth, right next to his iPad. What is this? My dad asked, looking at the drive. Chloe's family owns the security company that monitors the intersection on Grand Avenue, I said, my voice flat. The day of the accident, the street cameras captured the entire incident in high definition. The footage clearly shows Saraphina's car accelerating 20 feet before she struck me, and her windshield wipers weren't even on. It was a clear day, and there was no traffic. I looked at my dad, my dark eyes quiet and steady. If the Vance family tries to cancel the engagement or sue the Sterling family, we can submit this footage to the police. A deliberate hit and run with a lethal weapon carries a 10-year sentence in this state. I don't think Saraphina's father wants to see his only daughter in a gray jumpsuit. My dad stared at the flash drive, his face turning from anger to an absolute, stunned silence. My mom let out a sharp, choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Saraphina. She did it on purpose. Yes, I said, standing up from the table. Julian knew too. He was sitting in the passenger seat. That's why he grabbed the steering wheel at the last second. To keep her from crushing my chest. I looked at my parents, my expression entirely peaceful. I'm going to my room to pack my bags. The flight to London is in 2 days and I still need to pick up my student visa. Haley, wait, my mom cried, her eyes filling with tears as she stood up. The visa? We haven't processed the tuition transfer yet. I've already handled it, Mom, I smiled, turning to the door. Chloe's family has a foundation in London. They've agreed to sponsor my studies. You don't have to spend a single cent of the Sterling family's money on me anymore. As I walked out of the breakfast room, I heard my dad's shaking hand reach for the flash drive, the clatter of his coffee cup against the table the only sound. In the quiet house, the perfect alliance was broken, and I was finally free. The rain had stopped by Wednesday morning, replaced by a pale, winter sun that shone through the high glass windows of the airport terminal. I stood by the boarding gate, holding my passport and my single suitcase. Chloe stood beside me, her eyes red, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest to keep from crying. Haley, are you really going? Chloe sobbed, looking at me, You can stay at my house. My parents, they'll adopt you. You don't have to go to London alone. I want to go, Chloe, I smiled, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. I want to see the old library. I want to study the ancient manuscripts. And I want to see what the world looks like when I'm not standing in Julian's shadow. He's outside, Chloe whispered, her gaze shifting toward the glass partition of the terminal. I froze. I slowly turned my head. Julian was standing near the security barrier. He was wearing a dark blue wool coat, his hair wet from the damp morning air, his face pale and thin. He didn't have his usual security guards with him. He stood there alone, his dark eyes fixed on me through the glass, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He didn't try to cross the barrier. He didn't try to shout my name. He only stood there, his chest giving a slow, agonizing heave, his eyes filled with a deep, silent plea that made my nose sting slightly. Haley, Chloe said, her voice shaking. Are you going to say goodbye? I looked at Julian. I remembered the day the old oak tree sprouted its first green leaves. I remembered his pale, slender hand on my head. Her. I'll take her. He had saved my life once. He had given me a home. And then he had destroyed me. No, I said, my voice quiet but steady as I turned back to the boarding gate. The past is gone, Chloe. There is no goodbye. I handed my boarding pass to the attendant, my footsteps light as I walked down the narrow, carpeted corridor toward the plane. I didn't look back. The flight to London was long and quiet, the plane climbing through the white clouds until the city below was nothing but a tiny, distant speck in the dark blue ocean. I lay back in my seat, my eyes closed, my breathing calm and steady. Julian, you wanted me to be your sister. Now I am gone. And you are finally free. 3 years later. The winter in London was soft and gray, the mist hanging low over the river Thames, the red double-decker buses splashing water onto the wet cobblestones of the embankment. I stood in the conservation room of the British Museum, wearing a simple white lab coat and a pair of delicate latex gloves. I was holding a small silver surgical spatula, carefully removing a layer of dirt from a 19th century manuscript. I was 24 now. My hair was longer, falling over my shoulders in soft, dark waves, and my face was healthy, my eyes clear and peaceful. Haley, my supervisor, a kind-faced woman named Dr. Sterling, a different Sterling, thank goodness, said, entering the room with a letter. The registration for the Contemporary Art Gala next week has been processed. You've been chosen as the lead curator for the Eastern exhibition. Thank you, Dr. Sterling. I smiled, setting my tools down. Oh, and Haley, she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. The sponsor of the exhibition, the Sterling Group from the capital. They've requested a private tour of the gallery before the opening. The CEO personally signed the request. My hand went still. The CEO? I asked, my voice flat. Julian Sterling, she said. He's currently in London for a commercial summit. He'll be arriving at the museum at 6 p.m. today. I looked at the silver spatula in my hand, my heart giving a quiet, steady thrum. 3 years. For 3 years, I had not heard his voice. I had not seen his face, except for the occasional article in the financial papers that detailed his success as the young head of the Sterling Group. He had never married Saraphina. The Vance family had been quietly removed from the shipping board, and Saraphina had been sent to a private clinic in Switzerland after the hit-and-run footage was leaked anonymously to the board. Julian had lived alone, managing his father's empire with a cold, ruthless efficiency that made him one of the most feared men in the corporate world. Haley, Dr. Sterling asked, looking at me with concern. If you're busy, I can have another curator. No, I said, my voice calm and clear. It's fine. I'll do the tour. At 6 p.m., the museum was quiet, the grand marble halls empty of visitors, the warm yellow lights casting long, elegant shadows across the exhibits. I stood by the entrance of the eastern wing, wearing a simple dark blue silk dress and a pair of clean white gloves. The heavy double doors of the gallery were pushed open by a security guard. Julian walked in. He looked different. He was older, his face thinner, his eyes carrying a deep, permanent shadow of exhaustion that had not been there 3 years ago. He was wearing a dark gray, bespoke suit, his posture straight, his presence still, carrying that same, suffocating pressure. But as he saw me standing by the marble pillar, his polished shoes stopped. Instantly, his throat bobbed with difficulty, his hands clenching into tight fists inside his pockets. Haley, he said. His voice was no longer cold and commanding. It was a soft, trembling whisper that made the quiet gallery feel incredibly small. Mr. Sterling, I said, bowing my head slightly in a polite, professional gesture. Welcome to the British Museum. I am Haley Sterling, the lead curator for the Eastern exhibition. Julian's face went paper white. He took a step forward, his hand reaching out to touch my arm, but he stopped an inch away. as if he were afraid my skin would turn to ash. Haley, please, he whispered, his eyes bloodshot, his voice raw with a deep, agonizing pain. Don't call me Mr. Sterling. It's Julian. I'm here. The tour will take 30 minutes, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice level and calm, carrying no anger, no hatred, and no pain. We have 24 pieces of contemporary art from the late Qing dynasty. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I turned my back on him, walking down the long, carpeted gallery, my voice clear and professional as I explained the history of the paintings. Julian followed me. He didn't look at the art. He didn't look at the paintings. His eyes were fixed entirely on me, on the quiet, elegant woman who had once been the small, malnourished orphan girl he had brought home from the courtyard. As we reached the final piece, a painting of an old oak tree in spring, Julian suddenly caught my wrist. His hand was shaking so violently I could feel his pulse through my skin. Haley, please, he sobbed, his voice raw, his head falling forward onto my shoulder, his tears wetting the dark blue silk of my dress. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was terrified of what my father would do to you if he found out. I thought if I pushed you away, if I made you hate me, you would be safe. He clutched my hand against his chest, his heart beating with a rapid, frantic desperation. I canceled the engagement, Haley. I destroyed Saraphina. I lived alone in that house for 3 years. Please just come home. I'll give you everything. I'll tell the world you're my wife. I looked at him. I looked at his pale, wet face, at the tears that had ruined his perfect, mature composure. But my heart was quiet. It was like looking at a book I had read a long, long time ago. I remembered the characters, I remembered the plot, but the story no longer belonged to me. I reached down and gently, but firmly, removed his fingers from my wrist. The oak tree is beautiful, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice quiet and soft. But the leaves are already dry. It's time to let them fall. I took a step back, my dark eyes quiet and peaceful. The tour is complete. Have a nice day in London, Mr. Sterling. I turned and walked out of the gallery, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor, leaving him standing alone in front of the painting of the old oak tree, the warm yellow lights of the museum casting a long, dark shadow across his back, until he disappeared from my sight. The next morning, the rain had stopped, the pale London sun shining brightly over the River Thames. I stood on the stone embankment, watching the red buses splash through the puddles of water, my hand resting on the stone balustrade. My hand was bare, no silver ring, and no pale white line. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from Chloe. Haley, my dad's company is hosting a celebration party next week. Will you call me? I smiled, my fingers typing slowly on the screen. I'll be there, Chloe. On time. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked slowly down the embankment, the warm wind brushing against my face, my breath calm and steady. The past was gone. The sickness was cured. And I was finally free.